Legendary filmmaker Rob Reiner and his wife experienced an unthinkable moment inside their own home, a place meant to be safe. The situation involved someone they knew and trusted, turning their world upside down. Rob, who spent decades creating heartfelt stories about love, family, and connection, suddenly found his own life tangled in heartbreak. His son Nick Reiner's long and public struggle with personal challenges had already shaken the family, but no one anticipated how intense things would become the night before everything fell apart. Investigators are now revisiting old statements Nick once made about his father, remarks that seemed to hint at warning signs long before events spiraled. The heartbreaking incident involving Rob Reiner and his wife, Michelle Singer Reiner, reportedly unfolded on December 13, 2025. A night that was supposed to be filled with joy and laughter. That evening, the couple attended a Christmas party hosted by Conan O'Brien, surrounded by friends, colleagues, and familiar faces celebrating the holidays. Yet behind the festive music and bright lights, something felt off. Witnesses later told investigators that a heated argument suddenly erupted between Rob and his son Nick, quickly drawing attention. It was not a quiet disagreement. Voices were raised, and the tension was impossible to ignore as it echoed through the party. Guests exchanged uneasy looks as the confrontation grew louder. Several people later described Nick's behavior as unsettling, saying it stood out in a way they could not forget. Something about the night felt wrong, and one guest later said Nick had everyone completely on edge. That phrase spread quickly as investigators began piecing together what happened in the hours before things took a dark turn. Rob Reiner did not shy away from the situation. He confronted it head-on, trying to calm things rather than pretend nothing was wrong. Michelle stayed by his side, the two moving together in a united and steady way, refusing to let the moment spin out of control. When they decided to leave the party, it did not appear dramatic or angry. It seemed deliberate, as if they were trying to guide Nick away from the public eye and handle the matter privately. To those watching, they looked like parents doing their best to protect their family and regain control of a moment slipping away. Later that same night, Rob spoke on the phone with Eric Idle, and the tone appeared completely different. They discussed future work, including the long-awaited Spinal Tap 2 project. According to Eric, the conversation was light and focused on creative plans, with no hint of personal turmoil. Rob sounded motivated, hopeful, and forward-looking. Yet in quieter moments before that night, Rob had privately confided in friends that he was afraid of his own son. It was not said in anger, but from a place of genuine fear, like a parent feeling helpless in the face of behavior could not control. That worry would soon grow heavier after they returned home. In the early hours of December 14th, something tragic reportedly occurred inside the Reiners' Brentwood home. The Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office later stated that the incident happened before sunrise, though the exact time could not be determined. That account has been disputed by others who claimed the timeline was clear. Around 3 p.m., their daughter Romy Reiner, who lived across the street, went to check on them after being unable to reach them. When she entered the house, she immediately sensed something was terribly wrong and called for help. Paramedics and LAPD officers arrived within minutes. Rob and Michelle were found unresponsive. Authorities quickly secured the home and launched a full investigation, treating it as a serious domestic case. Detectives noted there were no signs of forced entry. Doors and windows were intact, as if nothing had been tampered with, suggesting whoever was involved had already been inside or was allowed in willingly. As investigators canvassed the neighborhood, neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual that night. No alarms, no shouting, no sounds of chaos, nothing out of the ordinary at all. The silence surrounding the Reiner home made the situation feel even more chilling, leaving many to wonder what truly happened behind those quiet Brentwood walls. In a neighborhood where sound carries easily and security systems capture nearly everything, the absence of noise that night stood out like a warning sign. Investigators quickly noted that whoever moved through the Reiners' home appeared to know it well. Every movement seemed deliberate. There were no signs of chaos, no disturbances. Only a controlled stillness that suggested familiarity with the space. As detectives reconstructed the timeline, attention increasingly focused on Nick Reiner. According to police reports, he left the house shortly after the tragic event, around 4 a.m. on December 14th, not long afterward. He arrived at the Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica. Hotel staff later told officers that nothing about his behavior raised concern. He checked in calmly, spoke normally, and appeared composed, showing no visible signs of distress or panic. However, when investigators later searched the hotel room after Nick checked out, they reportedly uncovered evidence that directly linked him to what had occurred at the Brentwood home. That discovery connected the hotel stay to the events under investigation and placed Nick squarely within the critical timeline. His stay was brief. Within just a few hours, he left again, moving on quickly, as if unwilling to remain in one place. Later that same day, surveillance cameras captured Nick at a gas station near Exposition Boulevard and Vermont Avenue. The footage showed him walking in casually, purchasing a drink, paying, and leaving without hesitation. He did not appear rushed or confused. Everything about his demeanor seemed calm and routine, a stark contrast to what investigators believed had already occurred by approximately 9:15 p.m. that evening. Police had located Nick near Exposition Park, close to the University of Southern California campus. Several patrol cars converged on the area in a controlled operation witnessed by bystanders. Despite the flashing lights and tension of the moment, Nick did not resist. He complied with officers and was taken into custody without incident. By the end of that night, investigators had begun to see a clearer picture emerge. The pieces included a heated argument, a silent home, no signs of forced entry, a swift departure, and a trail that stretched across Los Angeles. Still, one haunting question remained unanswered. What truly happened inside that house? Once the Brentwood home was secured, forensic teams entered to determine exactly what had taken place. They carefully examined every part of the property, attempting to reconstruct events that witnesses and neighbors could not explain. Without interior cameras or precise timestamps, investigators relied heavily on scientific evidence, including temperature readings, physical indicators, and microscopic traces. Every detail mattered. The medical examiner focused on determining when Rob and Michelle Reiner died and how it occurred. Two critical indicators guided the analysis: rigor mortis, which causes muscles to stiffen after death, and lividity, which shows how blood settles once circulation stops. Together, these markers help estimate the time of death. Based on these findings, the examiner concluded that both Rob and Michelle likely died in the early morning hours, nearly 12 hours before they were discovered. This aligned with investigators' suspicions that the tragedy unfolded during the quietest part of the night, while the neighborhood slept. Attention then shifted to the nature of the injuries. Forensic specialists identified multiple sharp force injuries, meaning wounds inflicted by a sharp-edged object at close range. The injuries indicated face-to-face contact and deliberate, sustained action. What stood out most was not only the type of wounds, but the number of them. The evidence suggested the attack did not end quickly. Instead, it continued for a period of time, reflecting an intensity that deeply disturbed even seasoned investigators. From a forensic standpoint, repeated injuries point to continued action rather than a sudden, impulsive moment. Investigators did not speculate emotionally. They focused on what the evidence meant legally. In this case, it strongly suggested intent, indicating that the attacker chose to continue rather than stop. Following these conclusions, Nick Reiner was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree homicide, one for each parent. Under California law, first-degree charges are reserved for cases believed to involve deliberate actions, and in some cases, premeditation. Prosecutors also added special circumstances because the case involved multiple victims. This elevated the matter to the most serious level possible, significantly increasing the potential penalties. If convicted, Nick Reiner could face life imprisonment without parole or, depending on how the case proceeds, capital punishment. The Los Angeles District Attorney's Office stated that these were the most serious charges available under the law, emphasizing confidence in the forensic findings and the strength of the evidence, with a solid timeline, a confirmed cause of death, and proof of close, sustained contact. The case shifted from tragedy to one of the most intense legal battles the city had seen in years. When Nick Reiner appeared before a judge for the first time, the atmosphere was stark and sobering. The silence of the courtroom, the absence of cameras, and his plain attire underscored the gravity of the moment. On December 17, 2025, he was escorted into a Los Angeles courtroom for his initial appearance. Until then, the case had existed only in reports and official statements. Now it entered the public legal arena where every word and action became part of the permanent record. Security was tight. No cameras, no live broadcasts, and no television coverage were allowed. Only a small number of reporters, attorneys, and court officials were present to witness the beginning of a case that had already shaken many, and was only just beginning to unfold. The restrictions were already in place long before Nick Reiner entered the courtroom, and they remained throughout the entire session. When the doors opened and he was escorted in by sheriff's deputies, he was guided directly to the defense table. The room went completely silent. Every movement and every glance seemed to carry weight. That first appearance did more than begin a legal process. It marked the moment the quiet mystery surrounding the Brentwood tragedy officially transformed into a courtroom drama. As Nick entered, many immediately noticed what he was wearing: a harm prevention smock typically issued to individuals under close supervision in serious custody situations. The garment was clearly visible and drew attention, yet no one acknowledged it. The judge made no comment. The attorneys did not mention it. The hearing proceeded as if it were not there at all. Once the session began, the courtroom grew still as the charges were read aloud. Nick Reiner faced 2 counts of first-degree homicide, one for his father and one for his mother. The charges were delivered in cold, precise legal language, stripped of emotion or commentary. When the judge asked whether he understood his rights, Nick responded briefly and calmly, confirming that he did. It was the only time he spoke during the hearing. He did not enter a plea, ask questions, or visibly react. He remained still and expressionless, focused on the proceedings, seemingly withdrawn into his own thoughts. After the charges were read, the hearing shifted to procedural matters. Nick's defense attorney requested a delay of the arraignment to allow more time before any plea would be entered. The judge agreed and scheduled a new court date for January 7, 2026. The prosecution did not object, and the process moved forward without disruption, emotion, or outburst. By the end of the morning, it was clear the case was only beginning. Yet the tension in the room said everything. It was only after several moments that many in the courtroom realized who was standing beside Nick Reiner. His defense attorney was Alan Jackson, a well-known legal heavyweight, with a reputation for handling high-profile cases under intense public scrutiny. Over the years, he had represented some of the most headline-dominating figures in the country, including Kevin Spacey, Harvey Weinstein, and Karen Reed. Jackson's presence sent a clear message. This was not a temporary arrangement or a symbolic defense. It signaled preparation for a long, grueling legal battle involving exhaustive filings, expert testimony, and relentless challenges to every detail. It made clear that the defense expected deep scrutiny and was prepared to meet it head-on. When the hearing concluded, Nick was escorted out in the same manner he entered Dunderguard, silent and without acknowledging the press. There were no statements from either side. The courtroom quickly emptied, leaving behind only quiet murmurs as reporters tried to process what they had just witnessed. Outside the courtroom, attention shifted almost immediately to a pressing question: who was paying for this level of legal defense? Legal experts understood the reality. A case involving 2 counts of first-degree homicide with special circumstances could take years to resolve. Such cases require expert witnesses, extensive forensic analysis, and endless pre-trial motions. Costs accumulate rapidly, often reaching millions before a trial even begins. Estimates suggested that Nick Reiner's defense could easily exceed $1 million, even without a trial date set. The issue was that Nick had no known income or active career that could explain how such expenses were being covered. That gap sparked widespread speculation. Some suggested funds from the Reiner family estate might be paying for the defense. Others questioned whether such use would even be legally permissible. Estate law experts noted that the issue is complex. In some cases, shared or inherited assets may be used for legal expenses, while in others, Doing so can lead to disputes or legal challenges from other heirs. None of these questions surfaced during the hearing itself. The court did not inquire about funding, and the defense offered no explanation. Outside the courthouse, however, debate intensified. Some argued that everyone deserved strong legal representation, regardless of the accusation. Others were deeply uncomfortable with the idea that family-linked assets might be used to defend someone accused of killing family members. While the courtroom proceedings remained calm and procedural, emotions outside were anything but. Even within the Reiner family, tensions reportedly lingered. Some sources claimed that certain surviving relatives hoped Nick would receive mental health treatment alongside criminal accountability. The case had expanded beyond legal definitions and entered the realm of family trauma, morality, and the meaning of justice itself. None of those claims, however, were officially confirmed. From the prosecution's standpoint, there was no ambiguity. They maintained that the evidence fully supported first-degree homicide charges. They emphasized the violence involved and Nick's movements after the incident, asserting that both met the legal threshold for the most serious charges available. Because special circumstances applied, sentencing options were limited. If convicted, Nick Reiner would face either life in prison without parole or the death penalty. No alternatives existed under those charges. Behind the scenes, the case continued to evolve. Detectives gathered additional information. Attorneys refined their strategies, and details not yet public circulated quietly among those involved. Although the courtroom remained orderly and restrained, the pressure beneath the surface continued to build. In the days that followed, attention turned to words Nick Reiner had spoken long before the case reached this point. Statements he once made about his upbringing resurfaced, and this time they carried new weight. Many began to see them as a key to understanding the deeper dynamics at play Nick had previously spoken about, never feeling truly close to his father, Rob Reiner. He described a persistent emotional distance that shaped how he viewed himself within the family. He often felt like an outsider, watching others bond while he remained on the margins, unsure how to belong. By most accounts, Rob was a devoted and present father, deeply engaged with his children through shared interests and routines. Those connections came naturally with Nick's siblings, but for Nick, they never quite clicked. The household appeared stable and loving from the outside. Yet Nick felt emotionally detached, as though he lived alongside his family rather than within it. Rob did not neglect him and tried to provide everything he could, but long work hours and success sometimes created gaps that were never intentional. Nick grew up surrounded by care, but it did not always reach him in a way he could fully feel. Over time, that disconnect turned into a quiet loneliness that deepened as he got older. As that isolation grew, Nick began seeking connection elsewhere. He drifted toward environments that promised freedom rather than structure, and that search led him into substance use. What began as experimentation escalated into dependency. By the age of 15, his struggles were severe enough to require rehabilitation. His family responded immediately, seeking help again and again. They did not hide the issue or deny it. It became an ongoing fight to save him from something that had already taken hold of his life. Nick later acknowledged how powerful and dangerous those substances were, and how long the battle would last. His addiction followed a familiar and painful pattern: periods of progress that offered hope, followed by relapses that hit even harder. During those low points, his life became unstable. He moved between places like Maine, New Jersey, and Texas, often without steady housing or direction. These were not career moves or fresh starts, but stretches marked by survival and uncertainty. Throughout it all, Rob and Michelle Reiner remained present. They stayed involved, refused to walk away, and continued supporting their son. Over the years, they spoke openly about his struggles, never shifting blame or denying their own pain. They invested time, money, and unwavering effort into his recovery, funding rehabilitation programs, covering treatment costs, and offering constant support through calls, visits, and patience. Friends later said their commitment never stopped, even when hope seemed thin. At one point, Rob Reiner tried a different approach to reach his son. Rather than keeping work and family separate, he invited Nick into his own world of filmmaking. In 2015, Father and son collaborated on Being Charlie, a raw and deeply personal film inspired by Nick's real-life struggle with addiction and recovery. The movie did not soften the reality of that journey. It portrayed relapse, resistance, and the exhausting fight to stay clean without offering easy resolutions. During the production, Nick appeared more grounded than he had in years. He showed up consistently, worked with focus, and seemed to regain a sense of direction. For his family, it offered a rare moment of hope that he might finally be turning a corner. For the first time in a long while, Nick had structure. Working side by side with his father in a creative, disciplined environment appeared to calm the chaos that had long followed him. Those close to the family noticed the change. There was purpose, order, and a faint sense of light breaking through the darkness. That stability, however, did not last. Not long afterward, Nick relapsed again, and everything he had built began to unravel. Old patterns returned: instability, emotional distance, and unpredictability. It was the same cycle that had defined much of his adult life. Each relapse cut deeper than the one before, straining not only Nick's strength but also the emotional reserves of everyone who loved him. In the years leading up to the tragedy, concern within the family continued to grow. The cycles were happening faster, and each one felt more dangerous. What once seemed manageable through patience and rehabilitation had become volatile and unpredictable. Rob and Michelle Reiner remained devoted, offering love, support, and guidance. But love did not erase fear. According to those close to them, that fear had become very real. They were no longer worried only about Nick's recovery. Quietly, they feared for their own safety as well. The emotional distance Nick had described years earlier never fully healed. It wasn't an excuse for anything that happened, but it revealed the painful complexity of their relationship, of mixed with guilt, hope mixed with disappointment, and a lifetime of effort that never quite bridged the gap. By the time of the Christmas party, the tension was not new. It had been building for years. The argument that erupted that night was not random. It was the breaking point of a family that had spent decades navigating addiction, relapse, reconciliation, and heartbreak. Every boundary, every difficult conversation, and every painful decision was part of the same long struggle that had shaped their lives long before that final night. As the years passed, Nick Reiner's feelings of disconnection, rooted in childhood, followed him into adulthood. They intertwined with his instability, his battles with addiction, and his repeated attempts to get clean. That emotional distance remained right up until the years before the tragedy, shaping nearly every relationship in his life. In the days after the deaths of Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner, the family released their first public statement. It came from their surviving children, Romy Reiner and Jake Reiner, who spoke together through a joint message. Their words avoided legal discussion or speculation and focused solely on grief. They described the loss as devastating and overwhelming, a shock beyond words. They spoke of Rob and Michelle not as public figures, but as parents and the emotional center of their family. The statement was raw, personal, and deeply human, reminding the public that behind the headlines was a family shattered in ways few could truly understand. They also expressed gratitude for the outpouring of support from around the world. Messages came from friends, colleagues, and strangers alike, offering love and condolences. Alongside that gratitude, they made a simple request for privacy. They asked for space to grieve and to prepare for what lay ahead. Since that statement, the family has given no interviews and made no further public appearances, choosing silence not to hide, but to mourn away from speculation. In the aftermath, the Reiner family stepped out of the spotlight while the legal process continued on its own course. A private memorial was held for Rob and Michelle, intentionally small and intimate. It was attended only by close family, lifelong friends, and a few trusted colleagues. There were no cameras, no broadcasts, and no public remarks afterward. Those who attended later described it as quiet and heartfelt, centered on love, memory, and connection rather than fame or accolades. It honored Rob and Michelle as people first, not as public figures. Across Hollywood, tributes poured in. Actors and filmmakers who had worked with Rob Reiner over decades shared stories and reflections. Kathy Bates spoke warmly about his guidance early in her career. Kate Hudson highlighted his influence across generations of performers. Nick Robinson remembered him as a generous mentor who offered encouragement and kindness. Each tribute was unique. They shared a common theme. Rob Reiner was known as a steady presence, a respectful leader, and a filmmaker who created environments where people felt safe to do their best work. Many praised his rare ability to move between genres: comedy, drama, romance without losing his clarity or warmth. As colleagues reflected, it became clear that his legacy was not only in the films he made, but in the people he shaped along the way. His work focused on emotion and humanity rather than spectacle. Films like The Princess Bride, *Stand By Me, and When Harry Met Sally, * became cultural touchstones because they spoke directly to the heart. Michelle Singer Reiner was also remembered with deep respect, though she lived largely outside the spotlight. She was known for her philanthropic work, devotion to family, and quiet strength. Those closest to them described Rob and Michelle as true partners, moving through decades of life side by side with shared purpose and love. As tributes continued, the contrast between Rob Reiner's celebrated public legacy and the private tragedy facing his family was impossible to ignore. Hollywood honored his work while simultaneously watching a painful legal case unfold. The Reiner family, grief, legacy, and tragedy became inseparable. Public remembrance existed alongside private heartbreak, moving in parallel yet deeply intertwined. As legal proceedings continued, memorials and tributes stood as reminders that behind every headline were real people: parents, partners, friends whose lives had touched countless others. Long after the media attention fades and courtroom lights dim, the loss remains deeply real for those who loved him most. Now, the question turns outward. What do you believe truly happened? Do you think Nick Reiner is responsible, or could there be more to the story than what has surfaced so far? Share your thoughts below. And if you found this story compelling, remember to like, share, and subscribe for more in-depth looks into the most shocking Hollywood stories.